Okay, well, I'm Justin Worland. I'm a correspondent at Time Magazine. I write about climate change. I'm thrilled to be here moderating this really distinguished panel for climate mayors on climate leadership in the age of COVID-19. We have Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, who is the incoming chair of the climate mayors here. Dan Lashoff, who is the director of the United States at the World Resources Institute, and Mayor LaToya Cantrell from New Orleans, who is on the steering committee for climate mayors. So just to start the discussion, we're going to have some opening remarks, and then we'll get into a bit of a moderated discussion. As most of you know, there were questions that you could submit upon registration. We'll be pulling from those. There's also a Q&A box that we may get to if we have time, but we'll circulate those questions afterwards if we don't get to them. So with no further ado, I'll kick it off to Mayor Walsh for some opening remarks. I think you're—
I'm sorry, Justin. Thank you very much, Justin. I appreciate that, and thank you for moderating today. It's an honor to you, Dan, and Mayor Cantrell. Thank you very much as well for all that you do. To all of our fellow mayors on the call, we want to welcome you. I am honored to be the new chair of the Climate Mayors. I want to congratulate my dear friend, our dear friend, Eric Garcetti, for his strong leadership over the past 7 years, and congratulate him on his new role. It's not really new anymore, but chair of C40. Eric certainly is a leader in this country when it comes to climate leadership. I want to thank him. I also want to thank Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner for his continued leadership as co-chair of Climate Mayors, and thank all my fellow climate mayors who have continued to drive climate action forward here in the United States. Your partnership is really important right now, and I look forward for all of us to accelerate our efforts. Everything we want to accomplish right now, public health, public safety, strong economy, racial justice, and equitable recovery from COVID-19, it all depends on a healthy environment. Climate action is the foundation for everything else we care about, and the facts are clear. We have less than 10 years to act on climate and prevent irreversible damage to our planet. It is up to us right now to confront it. In Boston and cities all over this country, we've taken this responsibility extremely seriously. We've upheld our commitments through the Paris Agreement. We're focusing on cutting emissions and creating green jobs. And we're preparing our residents for climate impacts like rising sea levels, storms, and heat waves. And I know that Mayor Cantrell can talk a little bit about that as well and what she's experiencing in her city. As mayor, we're probably the closest to the people that we serve. We see firsthand how climate change is already impacting people of our communities. And we see enormous opportunity right now to create a much healthier, safer, and a more prosperous world through climate action. We have banded together in this work through Climate Mayors. We've kept driving this work forward, speaking in one voice at a national level. It's been especially important over the last 4 years when we didn't have any climate leadership in Washington, and quite honestly questioned if they believed in science at all. And now we welcome the Biden administration, which is committed to climate action. We're already seeing the work beginning to take shape at the next level, and I'm proud to lead this work as its chair. These are certainly challenging times, there's no question about it, but we're ready to get to work. And now we have an opportunity to establish an agenda for the coming year. What we're going to do is identify our goals together, but we already know that we want to continue to strengthen our partnership with other climate networks, including C40, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. We need to continue to build broad coalitions that work. We need to show that everyone stands to benefit from climate action, and everyone has a role to play in making it happen. We want to keep creating more leadership opportunities within climate mayors. We represent right now more than 450 cities and tens of millions of Americans all across this country. There is so much diversity within our membership, which is really important. Everyone has something different to contribute, and we want to make sure that we're drawing on all of the talents and all of people's insights. And we want to engage with Washington as a partner on a national response to COVID-19. As a country, our recovery efforts must be rooted in equity and sustainability. As we rebuild our economy, we need to focus on green jobs. We need to look at the economic and social conditions that most of our populations and our vulnerable populations to COVID-19, especially people of color, immigrants, and low-income families are experiencing. and the same population is the most vulnerable impacts of climate change. It's amazing when you think about the impacts. If you look at a map, you'll see that the challenges of COVID in the neighborhoods that are happening all across America, I can speak for Boston, and the impacts of climate all across the city of Boston, and the map looks the same. Those populations are vulnerable. It's all connected. And now it's time to heal our nation by investing in long-term community health and well-being. And climate action is at the heart of our work. I'd like to hand it off now back to, I think I put it back to you, Justin, to bring our other speakers in.
Yeah, thank you. There's important threads in there that we'll pick up on in the Q&A. And so next we have Dan Lashoff.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Mayor Walsh. Honor to be part of this with you and Mayor Cantrell. Look, for the last 4 years, climate leadership in the United States has of necessity come from cities, states, and companies who rallied under the banner of "We are still in" to declare their commitment to the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement after President Trump announced that he would pull the United States out. And the United States officially withdrew from the Paris Agreement on November 4th, the day after the election, the only country to do so since the historic agreement was reached 5 years ago. But the Trump administration has actually been driving backwards on climate since January 20th of 2017. Fortunately, on January 20th, 2021, the United States will rejoin the Paris Agreement, and President-elect Biden has pledged to make climate action one of his top 4 day one priorities for his administration. Which begs the question, do we still need cities to lead on climate? The short answer to that obviously is yes. The urgency and scale of the climate crisis requires an all hands on deck approach. If the United States is going to approach the 45 to 50% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, the level of ambition demanded by science and expected of our citizens and by the international community alike, we have to build on the leadership of cities, states, and companies and not supplant it. That's the conclusion from the Accelerating America's Pledge report, which WRI contributed to. It found that enhanced non-federal action could by itself reduce emissions by up to 37% by 2030, and that emissions could be reduced by up to 49% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels, with an all-in approach in which the federal government builds on local, state, and private sector leadership. So the more nuanced question that I think we have to ask now is, what is the optimal role for cities in a climate action full court press? And what does the federal government need from cities to be successful? And what do cities need from the federal government to be successful as we move forward? These are the questions that WRI seeks to help answer through our Climate Federalism project, which brings climate action leaders from cities and states together with experienced federal climate policymakers. And we issued a report a couple of months ago, which is available on our website. Here are a few of the key principles that we outline in that report. First, cities are uniquely positioned to ensure that climate action strategies are also rooted in equity and justice. We must respond to the COVID-19 health crisis, the economic crisis, racial injustice, and a climate crisis simultaneously by building back better, as President-elect Biden has pledged to do. That means not only protecting the most affected communities from further harms, but also improving the well-being of those communities in ways that repair previous damage while creating new and better opportunities through the future. Cities must also play a key role in a number of policy areas, including land use and zoning, building code enforcement, and smart infrastructure investments that are resilient to climate change. At the same time, we know that federal leadership is essential to set national emission reduction targets, conduct international climate diplomacy, and invest in research and development of innovative climate solutions. In the vast majority of cases, however, a collaborative approach is really going to work best. And that's the history of federalism in the United States that we need to build on here. The deployment of electric vehicles is a perfect example. The adoption of electric vehicles has been supported by federal tax credits as well as various state and local incentives. Moving forward, we'll need federal zero-emission vehicle standards and funding, along with federal vehicle standards and funding from the federal level and investments in infrastructure, along with local electric vehicle procurement and support for the rollout of charging infrastructure accessible to all. The Climate Mayors EV Purchasing Collaborative is one great example of how local governments are leveraging their collective buying power and accelerating the conversion of municipal fleets to electric vehicles. And WI is excited to announce a new project launched this week with support from the Visas Earth Fund, aimed at converting all school buses to clean electric buses by 2030. Electric school buses will not only lower carbon emissions, they'll reduce air pollution in our neighborhoods, improve the health and performance of our kids in school, and reduce operating costs for school systems, freeing up scarce resources for teachers and staff. Electric school buses can even provide electricity to power emergency shelters in the aftermath of a storm or in anticipation of critical wildfire conditions. So it really is a win-win-win solution for climate change that we're excited to work on. So we look forward to working with climate mayors, as well as climate governors and climate companies and a climate president to confront the climate crisis once and for all moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. And then finally, we have Mayor Cantrell. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all again, and it's always good to be with my brother, Mayor. And congratulations to you, Mayor Walsh, for your chairmanship. Look forward to working with you and even Mayor Turner there in Houston. And of course, Dan, thank you, and Justin. The city of New Orleans, you know, like many of my partners throughout the country, have been keeping very close and steady as it relates to climate change and doing what's necessary on the ground in spite of the lack of leadership at the federal level. So the question when you ask Dan of, you know, do cities have to take a step back? Absolutely not, because we wouldn't be where we are right now if cities, mayors haven't continued to lead even in the midst of, again, a lack of leadership. But, you know, things will change, and you know that we cannot do this alone. And that's one of the reasons why I joined the C40's Mayor's Task Force for COVID-19, because again, this is an obligation that we have just to do things differently, but also faster. Because you mentioned, Dan, all hands on deck absolutely is necessary. So we know that the pandemic is connected to climate, this crisis that we're in, and that the recovery from COVID-19 is our chance again to create the green and just future that we all want to see and really we need. Here in New Orleans, we have to prepare for 7 hurricanes, unprecedented in our history. And each time you have to be prepared, regardless if it comes your way or not. Will not return to business as usual. And just a couple of things that we've been doing here in New Orleans. Here this week, we announced the $5 million JP Morgan Chase Advancing Cities grant that we were fortunate to be a part of. It's an historic investment into blue and green infrastructure projects and creating those pathways, because we know I have 40,000 of my folks who are not employed. And also I'm very heavy, our city is on hospitality and tourism. So this is the perfect opportunity and obligation to pivot to more growth sectors. And we see that being in blue and green infrastructure. And since March of this year, in the midst of COVID, we put over 350 million of infrastructure projects in the ground, you know, in terms of advancing that work, notices to proceed, and an additional 245 million hitting the street this month and into next month. So infrastructure is where it is, and particularly focusing again on the blue and green. Also, we're exploring ways again to pedestrianize our areas, particularly the French Quarter, limiting vehicular traffic, of course, taking a bite out of those emissions I know Dan spoke about. New Orleans is one of the 12 cities to sign the C40's Divest Invest Declaration. That was in September. We're working to install dozens of electric charging stations across the city. Solar for All program we launched, providing low cost to no cost solar installations to wherever you live in Orleans, but being very intentional about looking through that equity lens that we have to be focused on. Of course, working with my Governor Edwards, with his climates initiative task force, my sewage and water board, we just added 6 hybrid electric trucks to the fleet. And what this means for us is 50% increase in miles per gallon and 33% decrease in emissions. So again, that win-win. And I also had to make sure that the city filed lawsuit against a number of oil and gas pipeline companies whose actions have damaged our coastland, our wetlands, and making this city more vulnerable, and really our state, Southeast Louisiana coastlines, more vulnerable to flooding and, of course, to hurricanes. And when you talk about 7 that we had to prepare for this year, 2 hitting, it's real. And now is the time. And I'm just committed to this work because time isn't on our side. We're behind the 8 ball. But I will have to say, although the federal government may have taken us out of that Paris, the climate action agreement, but mayors across this country have been relentless in our charge and our commitment to this effort. And we will continue to do that. I'm all in.
Great. Well, thank you. All 3 presentations or remarks have lots of threads to pull on in this discussion period. So just to open, I want to sort of ask anyone who wants to remark, what do you hope for from the incoming Biden administration in the first 100 days, in the first 6 months on climate? What are your climate hopes for the incoming administration?
Oh, well. First of all, a stimulus package, a relief, expedited package coming to help our cities. The city of New Orleans, the money from the initial CARES was diverted and diluted at the state level. And I have expenses that were approved but not reimbursed in an upward of $133 million. So it's hurting. I'm on furloughs right now, all of our people, public safety. And this doesn't look to stop as we move into 2021. Rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement on day 1, huge step in the right direction. And again, ensuring that all funding, included climate-related infrastructure funding, goes directly to the cities. None of this threshold. Now, I know for Orleans, we're under the $500,000 population mark, and that's been used against us as well. But cities need the money. They need it as soon as possible because we're on the front lines moving this forward, and it can't happen without us.
I agree with the mayor on what she said with the stimulus package. I think that's really key. President like Biden and Vice President like Harris have already made it very clear that climate will be a major priority of their administration. As the mayor just said, re-entering the Paris Agreement is key. Laying out a COVID recovery plan that works hand in hand with climate goals, they've done that. We need to strengthen our clean energy standards. It's time to prepare our workforce for jobs of the future, green jobs. Many of our jobs, the mayor talked about her hospitality industry, ours in Boston too, is getting hit, and it doesn't seem like it's going to come back anytime soon. These green jobs can be jobs that can replace some of our hospitality in Boston and other places. We need a national commitment to infrastructure. You hear the mayor talk about the investments being made in New Orleans at $350 million, another $250 million. We need infrastructure all across America. There's huge opportunities to create hundreds and thousands of jobs, build green, resilient infrastructure. It's also, we need to, hopefully the administration, I know they will draw on the incredible talent and innovation of the American people to create long-term sustainable solutions. I know that, one thing that's encouraging to me is hearing President like Biden speak. I think at least I've seen him since he's been elected 3 or 4 times, talk about the future of America, and the climate is a conversation right at the top of the conversation. And I know that climate mayors are ready to support this administration. Cities have always been engineers of innovation, especially when it comes to climate solutions. So the climate mayors stand ready to engage with Washington on potential strategies at a national level. And anything that comes from Washington has to be carried out through cities anyway. It's going to be mayors that's going to do the work.
Great. I mean, I agree with all of that. And I just add one other area. The Trump administration has rolled back over 100 environmental safeguards, and we're looking for the Biden administration to not just reinstate the pre-existing regulations and standards that we need to protect us and reduce emissions, but roll forward with stronger standards. Vehicles is again, the example I'll cite as one area where EPA has clear authority to set stronger emission standards that drive us towards the zero emission, 100% electric vehicle future that we need to have in order to solve the climate crisis and also improve the air quality in our cities. So that's just one example of the kind of administrative action that the Biden administration can take on.
Great. Well, Mayor Walsh, I want to come to you. In your opening remarks, you alluded to this, but over the last 8 months, we've really seen the intersections of COVID, climate, racial justice, and I'm just curious, how are you working to address the systemic sort of nature of these issues in your work as mayor, and what is the role, for mayors more broadly in driving this change?
Yeah, thank you. As I said in the beginning, the parallels between COVID crisis and the climate change are really amazing. COVID has made it clear how important it is for us that we need to plan for the future and a plan for the future. We need to listen to scientists. We need to make sustainability a fundamental value of our society. COVID has also exposed and worsened many of our society's inequalities. People who have low incomes, people who have unsustainable housing, people who have health conditions are being hit the hardest. We're seeing that in Boston. People of color are being hit the hardest. The same goes for climate change. We know that people of color, immigrants, and non-speakers are at greater risk for climate impacts like heat waves, sea level rise, and power disruptions here in Boston and around this country. Climate action is not just an environmental issue. It's a public health issue. It's a public safety issue. It's a human rights issue. And it's certainly a racial justice issue. As part of the reason I declared racism as a public health crisis in Boston is that we need to recognize all the ways that historic systemic racism has profound and devastating impacts on the people's health, well-being, and survival. And our long-term recovery from COVID needs to be rooted in environmental and racial justice. I'll give you an example. Carbon emission standards will focus on reducing emissions in our largest buildings and building career pathways for people of color. We're making sure that the populations most impacted by climate change benefit will be from green jobs that we create. And I will make equity a central focus of my leadership at Climate Mayors. And I think that many of our cities across America, we're all grappling with the same issues. So I think the way we do this is by laying down a blueprint, a roadmap, so that we can help each other. I mean, obviously, Mayor Cantrell, myself, Mayor Turner, and other folks, we have environmental officers. We have ability to do things. Some mayors and cities don't have that ability. They might have a part-time person. So it really is laying down a blueprint that other cities can follow across America. So that's how I see us working closely together in different areas.
Well, Mayor Cantrell, I want to ask a question in a similar vein. Climate change cuts across a whole variety of issues, as we were just talking about, racial justice, the economy, and yet that isn't necessarily always apparent to people on the ground. How do you make the case to people in New Orleans that that this is climate change is an issue that they should be focusing on, and that you should be focusing on, and that really affects their day-to-day lives?
Sure. Well, first of all, kind of going back to my comment earlier, we went through we had to prepare for 7 hurricanes this season. That's unprecedented. And every time that was citizens not only, having to listen, but prepare themselves for what was coming our way. And Hurricane Zeta hit us. The eye was over New Orleans. And so while it did not bring a lot of water, it brought wind. And it was a Category 3 when it made landfall. You can't make that up. And so, when you're talking about the community, it helps, I hate to say, when you have those events, simply because it is the science that has been telling us such. So we engaged all of our stakeholders at the grassroots level, foundations, organizations, you name it, to develop a climate action equity project. And so this was recently presented to the City Council with proposed action items as well, so that we can start doing the work, meaning implementing different policies as well as programming to, again, bring people along. In addition to that, when I talked about the 7 hurricanes that we had to prepare for, the majority came so fast. So while we start at hour 60, well, you learn about these, you don't even have hour 60 anymore. So it's forcing us to even reevaluate, you know, our evacuation plans and strategies, and a more of a sheltering in place type of component. I also mentioned our investing in blue and green and gray infrastructure. Infrastructure has been a top priority for me coming in, you know, no honeymoon at all. And we had to do some things that were unprecedented, never been done before, to get people focused on and getting their buy-in. So one example, in November of 19, I went to the public, asked them to approve a bond measure for us to sell 500 million in bonds. Well, who knew? Now that's going to act as a local stimulus for 2021 as well as 2022 on infrastructure. The 12 cities being one of them, again, to sign on to the C40's Divest and Invest Declaration in September. So all of these different things and initiatives I spoke on in my opening are really a result on bringing people along and demonstrated that we're serious about facing this problem in order to fix it so that we can be safe and healthy. And it all has to come, again, as Mayor Walsh said, through the lens of equity and inclusion and justice, literally for all.
Right. Well, very interesting. Dan, I want to go to you and just ask, we've talked obviously a lot about recovery in this conversation already, and I just wondered if you could give us a sense of how you feel cities should be incorporated into economic recovery, particularly, you know, if economic recovery that originates in Washington. And then just maybe a little bit of detail about partnerships that will allow this recovery to happen, you know, partnerships between cities, states, the federal government.
Sure. Well, as the mayor said, both emphasize the cities is where the rubber hits the road, and where a lot of the investment that funding has to come from Washington in this situation, because the budgets at the city level have been decimated by the economic crisis. They don't have the ability to borrow money the way the federal government does. So first and foremost in the recovery, we've got to get some funds into city budgets. One way to think about how to spend that money is, what can we do with those investments that not only puts people to work immediately, but also reduces pollution that's harming our neighborhoods, reduces greenhouse gases, and lowers long-term costs. So if we think about an investment in upgrading our schools to provide solar on the roof to make them energy efficient, that does all those things. And those are the kinds of investments that we should be prioritizing. If we're replacing city vehicle fleets with electric vehicles, and the federal government can provide some of the upfront money for transit buses or school buses or other kinds of light-duty vehicles, or even garbage trucks, which are now available. Those investments, right now, they're relatively expensive up front. Those costs are coming down, but by getting some stimulus money into those kinds of investments, you're lowering those long-term costs. At the same time, you're reducing pollution. So that kind of partnership is exactly what we need. And I know that Climate Mayors is working to aggregate demand from cities for those kinds of particularly electric vehicle solutions. And a partnership with the federal government would just allow cities to accelerate where they want to go on all of these types of green investments that provide for recovery as well as long-term benefits.
Right. Well, I'm curious, you know, can talk about stimulus in the future next year, but I'm curious where right now, where does climate show up in your budgets right now? How are you funding these initiatives given the significant cash crunch for cities? And I open that up to either Mayor, I don't know if one of you wants to start.
Well, I'll go ahead, man.
Go, man.
You know, in our budget, we've dedicated 10% of our capital budget to climate preparedness. I was on a panel yesterday talking to some folks, and this question came up about where is the money going to come from. We have a program called Resilient Boston Harbor where we're going to build a 47-mile coastline around the harbor to deal with sea level rise. And so we put 10% of our capital spending out there. Number one. Number two, we have to leverage private development to be in this conversation as well, because we're preparing and protecting not just the assets of people, we're also protecting their assets as well. So they need to be part of the conversation. We need the philanthropic community to be involved in this conversation as well. I think that's going to be key for the future moving forward. We have trustees of the reservation here in Boston that does some major investments in green initiatives. We also have Bar Foundation, Green Ribbon Commission, some of these other places in the city that they get involved in that. That's another area. We are going to need, Dan said this, and the mayor said this, we're going to need major investment by the federal government. This is also going to, you know, when you think about the cost of a disaster, for every $1 billion is about $19 billion in mitigation money for a disaster. So by putting $1 billion up front, we're saving the country $19 billion in mitigation disaster. And certainly Mayor Cantrell can talk that a lot better than I can because of what's gone in New Orleans over the last 25 years in New Orleans. Or Mayor Chernick can talk about what happened in Houston over the last couple of years. Or Mayor Garcetti can talk about what's happened in the forest fires out in LA over the last decade or more than that. So really the investment is smart money. It's money you're putting up front where you're saving on disaster relief money on the back end. So we are putting money up in the city of Boston, and we are leveraging private development, and we are working with the philanthropic community. And the next step key to that is going to be obviously the federal government and the state as well. Different state legislatures, depending on where they are, need to step up and make investments as well.
I would just, well, Mayor Cantrell, I want to let you follow up too, because it seemed like maybe you had something to add, but I just would add one additional question maybe to answer in addition to what you're going to say, which is there any pushback? Do you get any pushback from people who say, well, you know, this is a problem that you know, is not so urgent, and let's deal with the urgent needs right now, and how do you address that if you do? Maybe it's not the case in New Orleans because, as you said, things are so obvious right now. But at any rate, I'd love to hear your response to both.
No real pushback, I will say, because over the past 2 years, I've had to take to the voters, you know, decisions that I needed them to make that allowed for the $500 million in bond sales, which top was definitely aligned with infrastructure improvements in the city, you know, that, you know, leading the charge to get a little bit more of what we generate in tax dollars off of hospitality going to the state when we were told, oh no, it will never happen, but it did happen because again, the needs are so great as it relates to infrastructure. So the projects and the dollars are definitely tied to our budget, but also, you know, additional ways to leverage as the mayor spoke about, leveraging, you know, with the development community as well. And I've also just restructured projects to make sure that, you know, I have green and blue features in them. And so not just doing it to do it, but be smart about it in a way that you're leveraging every bucket of funding and resources. And so my thing is, you know, I have to spend the money, and that means do the work and do it right. So while I've gotten the civic trust that's necessary, now it really is demonstrating, again, getting that work done and letting them see the impacts of that. One example is that we have one of our green infrastructure projects holding millions of gallons of water. We had a storm come through and residents were able to see, even before it was completed, that holding that water kept it from getting into their home. So again, bringing people along, doing the work, and making sure that it's leveraged appropriately so that we can do more of it, but we can't do it alone. The federal government needs to absolutely make this a priority as it relates to our infrastructure and roads and streets and bridges and drainage. The U.S. Conference of Mayors, I know Marty led that charge too with, putting our plan and our ask before this current administration, but we're very excited as it relates to the leadership change to come.
If you don't mind, Jessica, can I just add a little more to this? Yeah, just I think that the second part of your question, that the way I would look at it in Boston is that the private sector, I mean, what we're doing in Boston, particularly what we're doing in Boston Harbor, is a series of 47 miles of connections, bringing people back to the ocean, back to the harbor. So even though we're building basically resiliency from sea level rise happening and doing damage in the city, we're also connecting people to the water. And those 364 other days of the year when people want to connect to the water. So it's an investment in infrastructure. It also, there's no scapegoating. The United States is in an economic crisis. We know that. Every single city and state is dealing with serious budget issues. It's forced us to take a hard look at our priorities. There's no question about it. Climate change in Boston and in many cities around America and the state, it remains a top priority. The bottom line is that we can't afford not to invest in climate action. To scale back our efforts would be short-sighted. We're just seeing what's happening nationally. I mean, Mayor Cantrell talked about 7 hurricanes, flooding, and wildfires out in the West, and millions, causing trillions of dollars worth of damage. We need to fight the cause of climate change, prepare for its effects now, or as I said earlier, we're paying a lot more down the road. This isn't a time to kick the can down the road. Climate action is the best investment that we can make in our cities and the future of our cities, quite honestly. It's about also protecting our young people, our kids, from climate disaster. It's about creating jobs for tomorrow. It's also about protecting public health and safety right now for generations to come. And we're going to continue to honor our commitment of 10% of all capital spending because the future of our city depends upon it. And definitely we need federal government to step up and support us in this effort. This is the fight of our generation. And certainly I believe that the new incoming president and the vice president, Biden-Harris, is going to be very, very key to this. And their administration is going to be up to the task. And I think that that's really important for us to understand as we move forward here.
Great. Well, I want to jump to some of the audience questions here as we get 40 minutes past the hour. One question is about the international element of this. Over the last 4 years, cities and states have stepped up, of course, to try to take the place of the federal government, or not take the place, but to address climate change where the federal government was not acting. And so there's a question here about what cities can do to contribute to the US's international commitment. It's NDC, which of course goes to the UNFCCC as a signal of where the US is going. And so what's the role for cities in contributing to the NDC and to international commitments? And I'll open that up to anyone. I would love to get Dan back in the conversation, but if either.
Well, I can jump in on that. It's been really critical that cities and states have stepped forward to say we are still in the Paris Agreement, and to project that into the international community through the America's Pledge Project and other work that WRI has contributed to. Because, when President Trump said he was going to pull out of Paris, he predicted that the agreement would fall apart. All the other countries would pull out as soon as the U.S. did. That didn't happen. The U.S. is the only country that's pulled out. And of course, we'll get right back in when President-elect Biden is inaugurated. But one reason is because we were able to communicate to the world that just because the federal government had pulled back from Paris, didn't mean there wasn't climate action happening in the United States. And so the leadership that cities have taken through climate mayors and other organizations, states through the U.S. Climate Alliance, and private companies through things like Science-Based Targets Initiative, all of those messages were really critical to the international community to say, look, yeah, Trump has pulled out, but the U.S. is definitely still part of this game.
You also have Mayor Garcetti, who is the chairman of C40, American mayor, obviously. And we had in 2017, when the U.S. Conference of Mayors came to Boston, we had the first climate summit where mayors from around the world came to Boston, and we were able to have a dialogue and a conversation here. We were anticipated to have a conference in Austin as well, but we had to cancel, obviously, because of we had a climate conference in Hawaii, but in Austin we're supposed to have one this year. So the commitment is still there on the mayors. I was in Copenhagen. We were able to go there, and there was many mayors from America there. So I think the fact, in a strange way, U.S. climate mayors in this last 3 years has raised its visibility, and we've gotten 462 cities now included in climate mayors. The infrastructure actually for cities around America is probably stronger today than it's ever been. And having an administration in Washington focused on this allows us the opportunity not to have to reinvent and create partnerships around the country, but actually they're there now. And I think that following the lead of international cities is really important for us. And I think we need to, we're behind, we know this in the United States, we're certainly not to the scope of or where other cities in the world are as far as reducing carbon emissions and all of the green infrastructure they've done. But I think that the fact that we've never fully pulled out of Paris and we've never fully pulled out of these conversations with international cities around the world is going to benefit us in the long run.
I can just follow up with one question, again, open to anyone who wants to take it. But just, going forward as the U.S. tries to craft climate policy and perhaps hits roadblocks, whether it's in Congress or with the courts, what role do you think cities will play continuing to give the international community confidence that the U.S. is going to keep working on these issues? I mean, do you see that as part of your mandate going forward?
With climate mayors, yes, and I think that we've shown that commitment to the nations of the world from the United States in the last 3 years and 11 months, or however long it's been. And I think that, as Dan said and the mayor said, once Vice President Biden gets sworn in as President of the United States of America, we go back into C40. I think we'll start to see an EPA that understands, an environmental secretary that understands the importance of making this work a priority, not just on the campaign trail, but in actuality. And I think that the rest of the world is excited to have us come back. I think that, when I was in Copenhagen, and we were in Copenhagen, I should say, there was no, we didn't talk about Trump, we didn't talk about the United States so-called official stance on climate. We were talking about how do we work with each other and reducing emissions and things like that. That's really the conversation. So I honestly think that for as much as the Trump administration has done to set us backwards, and they have, don't get me wrong, I think our view, the world view of us when it comes to climate, people understand that there are many, many tens of millions of Americans that are concerned about the future, not only of the United States, but the future of the world's atmosphere.
And I would add, hey, as climate mayors, I mean, we know what has worked in our own communities, right, to create more jobs and be in equitable and sustainable cities. We've laid out core building blocks. I mean, we get it, and we have been doing the work. And as Marty said, hey, when we were in Copenhagen, we were talking that allow for a more broader application of what we're doing. And just cities across America are demonstrating that economic growth and environmental stewardship go hand in hand. So the time is now. And so we're going to hold ourselves accountable and hold our government accountable as well. With new leadership, it's a new day.
Great. Well, I have just maybe time for one question for all of you, and then we'll go to closing remarks here. But this is just hopefully a hopeful question, which is just, what would you be excited to say, within the next 4 years that has been accomplished, that you've accomplished on climate? I guess I should say you've accomplished and nationally has been accomplished on climate. And we can just go around with maybe quick answers so we have time for closing remarks.
I could think of a couple of things, but one is some benefits to this lawsuit that was filed against oil gas that has damaged our coastline, our wetlands, and absolutely necessary. And then, we set a goal of reducing our carbon footprint by 2030, 50%. So, 4 years from now, I would at least like to say that we moved that ball, significantly, at least 25%.
I think locally, we plan to develop our emissions performance standard and implement several more resilient projects through our Climate Ready Boston. We also hope to continue developing our urban park network, which I talked about, Resilient Boston Harbor, and creating more pathways into green jobs, especially for the residents of color. Nationally, I hope we make significant progress towards the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. It's not just simply going back into the accord, but actually making significant goals. And I hope that we can emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic stronger than we were before. That would be what I would hope.
Great. And I'll just add, I think globally, we hope to see the United States re-enter the leadership of tackling the climate crisis with a strong commitment to a 2030 emission reduction target at the national level of 45 to 50% by 2030. And then at the local level, real commitment to transition to a 100% clean transportation system that includes all people, gives everybody access to mobility and where they need to go to shop and get to work with a variety of choices, whether that's a shared bicycle or an electric car or an electric bus. We have the technology now, so we shouldn't accept that that we allow pollution right into the middle of our cities in order for people to get around. We can't accept that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're now at the end of the discussion, and I guess we'll just go in the same order that we started with. So, Mayor Walsh, if you'd like to start with closing remarks.
Dan, Justin, I just want to thank you for moderating the conversation today. Dan, thank you as well, and Mayor Cantrell, thank you for your leadership. This is an exciting period going into 2021 here. When you think about, I'm honored first and foremost to be named the chair of U.S. Climate Mayors. I'm also honored to work with my colleagues. I love my colleagues, and I love the work that we do collectively together. And there's a real opportunity here. And I think that I want to thank the young people in this country that spoke up and spoke out last year. We had 10,000 young people in City Hall Plaza, fighting for our climate, and to let you know that we're hearing you, and we need to continue to work collectively together to make our nation better, and to make sure that we have a safe, clean, healthy nation for our future generations. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Walsh. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, just jumping in. So really, it's an honor to be part of this conversation with you, Mayor Walsh, with Mayor Cantrell. WRI wants to be a resource to cities that want to take the next step on climate, that want to have that partnership with the federal government and with states. We can help with technical support. We're doing that with a number of cities and helping them procure renewable electricity. We're starting this new project around electric school buses, and we just want to be a resource to help the governments and companies that are committed to climate action. And we see an unprecedented level of commitment, which is very encouraging. We see a lot of progress in technology, and now's the time to scale. So we've had a lot of good pilot projects and a lot of things, but now's the time to really commit to make the transition to a 100% clean economy and really tackle this problem once and for all. We're excited to be part of that.
Well, thank you all so much for including me in this discussion. I appreciate that. And again, anytime I'm able to get with my brother Mayor, it's always just a good time. And not only that, it's motivating. We are on the front lines every single day, and continuing to collaborate and share the work and also bring our people along. It motivates me, I know, but it motivates other mayors across the country. And so we're just needing to continue to be unwavering and also push for the support that we need from our private sector as well, and partners in terms of philanthropy and leveraging our resources to do the work. And sometimes it can be kind of lonely, you know, in your city as you're fighting for infrastructure. And so if we can make sure that we are helping to educate citizens across the country and helping mayors who are on the front line kind of carry that message so that their residents understand that it's not unique just to your city. You know, we're all in this together. And so sometimes, you know, you can feel like you're the only one in your own city. And that's why these conversations and partnerships are just so key, because again, it allows us to demonstrate that it's not just unique to us, but we can get through it if we take it on and work together.
Excellent. Wow. 5 minutes early, but I guess we'll conclude 5 minutes early. Thank you so much for these closing remarks and for taking the time. I think this was a very interesting discussion. And thank you to all the participants for coming. As I understand, there's a recording, so you can share it and watch it again if you'd like. But thank you again to everybody. Appreciate the time.